Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going small, really small, to explore the world of cells.
The fundamental units of life.
You got it. And you shared some fascinating material with us.
A biology textbook chapter and a study guide, both packed with insights.
Exactly. So we're diving deep into all that
Mhm.
to see what we can uncover together.
Ready for a journey into a world that's, well, too small to see, but absolutely essential.
I am. It's amazing, isn't it? Like, have you ever thought about the fact that every single thing our bodies do, breathing, thinking, feeling, it all boils down to what's happening in these tiny little worlds?
It really highlights the amazing efficiency of each cell. But we haven't always known about them. It all started with some pretty remarkable observations, really.
Oh, absolutely. Those pioneers of microscopy, right?
Mm.
Our textbook goes into the work of Robert Hooke and Anton van Leeuwenhoek. Basically gave us our first peek into this hidden world.
Yeah, it's fascinating how simple curiosity can lead to uh, those huge groundbreaking discoveries. In 1665, Robert Hooke, using a pretty simple microscope, was looking at a thin slice of cork.
Cork.
Yeah. He noticed these tiny compartments, and they reminded him of, well, the small rooms monks lived
Oh,
in.
interesting.
So he called them cells, and the name stuck.
It's crazy to think about that something we just take for granted today, this idea that everything alive is made of cells, was a revolutionary concept back then.
Absolutely. It's like realizing that the seemingly solid world around us, is actually made up of these tiny units, kind of like discovering that a brick wall is made of, well, individual bricks.
Perfect analogy.
Hmm.
And then Anton van Leeuwenhoek comes along with his even more powerful microscopes, starts looking at, well, everything, pond water, even dental plaque. And he finds this whole universe of what he called animalcules.
These tiny little creatures just swimming around.
Can you imagine seeing that for the first time?
Oh, talk about a total mind shift. It's like thinking you understand the world and then bam, you realize there's this whole other level of existence you never knew about.
Right. Our textbook mentions how these early observations led to the development of the cell theory. It's like the foundation of biology, really.
It really is. It's one of those big ideas that just shapes how we see life. The cell theory has three core principles. First, all living things are made of one or more cells. Second, the cell is the basic unit of life where all those important processes happen. And third, all cells come from pre-existing cells.
I mean, wow, that's incredible when you think about it. But cell biology is also a story of technology, wouldn't you say? I mean, our understanding of cells has just exploded as our tools for seeing them have gotten better.
Oh, absolutely. The development of the electron microscope, it was a game changer, completely changed everything. Instead of just seeing shapes under a light microscope, scientists could suddenly see the detailed inner workings of cells.
Like going from a blurry picture of a city to suddenly being able to zoom in and see, the streets, the buildings, people going about their lives.
Exactly. It's like unlocking a whole new level of detail. And that's what led to the whole field of molecular biology, really. This ability to study the molecules and processes happening inside cells at a way deeper level.
It's like getting the blueprints to the cellular machinery
Hmm.
so we can understand how everything fits and works together. But here's where it gets interesting, I think. Cells, they come in all these amazing shapes and sizes.
They really do.
It's incredible to think that the same building blocks can make a giant redwood tree and, a microscopic bacteria.
It's like you'd think they'd need totally different ingredients, right?
Right.
But it just shows the power of evolution to shape life in so many forms. Think of a nerve cell, for example. Long and thin, with extensions that can be meters long, transmitting signals throughout the body.
Like a biological communication cable.
Exactly. Or algae, those single-celled organisms that have these whip-like things, flagella,
Flagella, yeah.
that help them move through the water. It's like each cell evolved with its own special toolkit, perfectly adapted to its role.
That makes sense. But this brings up a question, for me at least. If cells are the basic unit of life, why are they so small in the first place? Why not just have giant megacells doing all the work?
Oh, that's a great question. And the answer comes down to a concept called the surface area to volume ratio. Basically, it's all about efficiency. Imagine you have a small cube and a much larger cube. The small cube actually has a lot more surface area relative to its volume.
So like A small town with lots of roads versus a huge city with just a few highways.
Yeah, exactly. Cells, they need to constantly exchange things with their environment,
What's
right?
that?
Take in nutrients and oxygen, get rid of waste.
Right.
A small cell, with its large surface area, it can do that much more efficiently.
Makes sense.
A giant cell would just get choked off, basically, unable to keep up with the demands of its own volume.
Like trying to run a marathon breathing through a tiny straw.
Yeah, exactly. It's like nature found this perfect size for cells, a sweet spot where they can function best.
I love that. A sweet spot. It's amazing. It's like nature's perfect design.
It is. It's a beautiful example of form following function in biology. But even with all this variety in shape and size, all cells have some key features in common. It's like they're all built from the same basic blueprint with some tweaks here and there.
So what are those essential ingredients for any cell, regardless of its shape or what it does?
Think of it as the bare minimum for a functioning cell. You need the plasma membrane first. That's the outer boundary.
Like the cell's skin?
Yeah, kind of, but more like a security guard, controlling what comes in and goes out.
Got it.
Then there's the cytoplasm. That's the bustling city inside where all the action happens, filled with a gel-like substance called cytosol, and all those structures called organelles that do specific jobs.
So the cytoplasm is the city, and the organelles are the buildings, each with its own purpose.
Perfect analogy.
I like that.
And of course, you can't forget the ribosomes, the cell's little protein factories.
Right, churning out those essential building blocks of life.
Exactly. And finally, you've got DNA, the genetic blueprint with all the instructions for building and running the cell.
It's mind-blowing how much is packed into such a tiny space.
It really is.
Now, our sources also talk about the two main types of cells.
Yeah.
Prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Is this where things get even more interesting?
Oh, absolutely. It's like comparing a tiny house to a mansion.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Prokaryotes are the simpler ones. They don't have a nucleus, so their DNA just hangs out in the cytoplasm. These are your single-celled organisms, like bacteria.
So like the minimalist tiny house dwellers of the cell world.
Exactly. Eukaryotes, though, they're way more complex. They have a nucleus to keep their DNA organized, plus a whole bunch of other specialized organelles. Plants, animals, fungi, all eukaryotes.
So the city dwellers with all their fancy amenities.
Right. Their internal organization is truly impressive. It's like a busy factory with all these different departments, assembly lines, power generators, shipping and receiving a well-oiled machine.
I kind of want to take a tour now. What would we see if we shrunk down and stepped inside?
Well, the first thing you'd see is that plasma membrane, this selectively permeable barrier. But it's not just a wall. It's more like a high-tech security system with checkpoints and gates.
So it's like a border crossing checking passports.
Yeah. And this selectivity is crucial for maintaining the cell's internal environment. We call it homeostasis, like having a thermostat keeping the temperature just right for the cell to function.
Gotcha. And I bet the cytoplasm would be buzzing. Our textbook describes it as a city, with all the organelles and molecules moving around.
Great analogy. One of the key players is the cytoskeleton. It's like the cell's scaffolding, giving it shape and support. But it also helps move molecules and organelles around.
The city's network of roads and highways.
Exactly. Speaking of important destinations, at the heart of the city is the nucleus. That's where the precious DNA blueprints are kept safe.
It's the library of the cell, storing all that genetic information.
Exactly. The nucleus is a busy place, controlling protein synthesis, making sure the cell is producing the right molecules. But no city can function without power, right? And that brings us to the mitochondria.
The powerhouses.
They are incredible. These guys convert energy from food into ATP, the cell's energy currency. And, get this, they might have once been free-living bacteria.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, they formed a symbiotic relationship with larger cells, eventually becoming a crucial part of eukaryotic cells.
That's just mind-blowing, like having tiny power plants inside each cell.
Exactly. But we've just scratched the surface here. There are many more organelles to explore.
Well, I, for one, can't wait to keep going. Let's dive deeper into those other organelles and see what they do. So we've explored the plasma membrane, the cytoplasm, the nucleus, like the cell's library, and the mitochondria, those energy powerhouses. What other cool stuff is going on in this microscopic city?
Well, there's the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER for short.
Okay.
It's this amazing network of membranes, kind of like a maze that stretches throughout the cytoplasm.
I'm picturing it.
And it's really important for making and transporting proteins and lipids.
So it's like the cell's manufacturing and delivery system, I guess.
Exactly. There are actually two kinds of ER, rough ER and smooth ER.
Ah, okay.
The rough ER, it's called that because it's covered in ribosomes. You remember those protein-making machines?
Oh, right, right.
So it's where lots of proteins are made and folded into their proper shapes. The smooth ER, though, that one doesn't have ribosomes. It's more involved in making lipids and getting rid of toxins.
So rough ER is like the factory floor, and smooth ER is like quality control, maybe?
I like that. Now, once those proteins are made in the rough ER, a lot of them need to be like processed and packaged to go to their final destination. That's where the Golgi apparatus comes in.
Ah, yes. Our study guide calls it the cell's post office, which I love.
It's a perfect name. The Golgi receives those proteins from the ER, modifies them, sorts them, and packages them into these tiny sacs called vesicles.
Like little shipping containers.
Exactly.
So it's like the Golgi is slapping addresses on those protein packages and sending them out.
That's exactly it. And then we have vesicles and vacuoles, which are the storage and transportation specialists of the cell.
Okay, so vesicles are like the delivery trucks, and vacuoles are the warehouses.
Perfect. Vesicles are smaller and they're always zipping between organelles or going to the cell membrane. Vacuoles, though, they're larger and they can store all kinds of stuff. Water, nutrients, even waste.
Our textbook mentions that plant cells have these huge central vacuoles. I mean, they can take up a massive amount of space. What's the deal with that?
Well, that central vacuole in plants, it's really important for maintaining the cell's shape. Think of it like a water balloon inside, pushing against the cell wall. It gives the plant structural support.
Oh, I see, like a built-in support system.
Exactly. And it helps to regulate water balance and can store nutrients and waste.
Makes sense. It's like a multi-purpose organelle.
It is. Now, plant cells also have these special organelles called plastids. They do a variety of things, but one of the most important is photosynthesis.
Right, the process where plants use sunlight to make food. Pretty incredible when you think about it.
It's one of the most fundamental processes on Earth. That's where the energy for almost all life comes from. But it's
Right.
not all about individual cells, right? They work together in different ways to form bigger structures. Going from single-celled organisms all the way to complex multicellular ones like us.
So we're talking about biofilms, colonies, tissues, organs, organ systems. It's like a whole cellular society.
Exactly. Which reminds me, we were talking about all the amazing things cells can do, and then there are these things called viruses.
Oh, right, those.
Yeah.
The hijackers. I'm still curious about those. They aren't even cells themselves, but they seem to be a big deal in biology.
They really are. Viruses are kind of a puzzle, They blur the line between living and non-living. They're basically just packets of genetic material, DNA or RNA, inside a protein coat.
Like sneaky little invaders?
Right. Viruses can't reproduce by themselves. They have to infect a host cell and use its machinery to make more copies of themselves.
So they're like those minimalist travelers who only pack the bare necessities.
Exactly. And because they rely on other cells, there's still debate about whether they're actually alive.
I can see why that's tricky. They're so simple, but they can have such a big impact on living things.
Oh, absolutely. Just look at all the diseases caused by viruses, colds, the flu, and even more serious stuff. They're constantly evolving, which makes them really tough to deal with.
It's like an ongoing arms race, isn't it?
It is. But speaking of teamwork, let's go back to how cells cooperate to form those bigger structures. I'm particularly interested in tissues.
Tissues, yeah. What are those exactly?
Tissues are groups of similar cells that work together to do a specific job. It's like having specialized workers in a factory.
So, like, muscle tissue is made of muscle cells that contract to allow movement.
Exactly. There are all sorts of different tissues in multicellular organisms. Nervous tissue, for example, is made of neurons that transmit signals throughout the body. It's how we think, feel, and respond to the world around us.
Amazing.
Then there's connective tissue, like bone and cartilage, which provides support. And epithelial tissue, which forms protective layers like skin and the lining of organs.
So many different types. It's incredible.
It is. And all these specialized tissues come together to form organs like your heart, lungs, and kidneys.
Each with its own specific function.
Exactly. Organs are like complex machines with different tissues working together. Your heart, for example, pumps blood throughout your body thanks to the coordinated efforts of muscle tissue, nervous tissue, and connective tissue. And then there are organ systems like the circulatory system, the respiratory system, and the digestive system, which are made up of multiple organs working together.
It's amazing to think it all starts with those tiny cells.
It really shows you the power of organization in biology. But let's zoom back in on individual cells for a moment. Remember that concept of cell transport. It's super important for keeping the cell functioning and maintaining that balance, that homeostasis we keep talking about.
Right, like the cell's import-export business, making sure everything is running smoothly.
Exactly. And just like in a busy port, there are different ways to move things across the cell membrane. Some substances can just diffuse across, moving from an area of high concentration to low concentration.
So they're just slowing along, like going downhill.
Yep. We call that passive transport. It doesn't require any energy from the cell. Things like oxygen and carbon dioxide can diffuse across the membrane really easily.
Makes sense. But what about bigger molecules, or ones that need to move uphill?
Ah, good question. That's where active transport comes in. For those cases, the cell needs to put in some energy. It's like hauling those molecules uphill, and it requires ATP.
The cell's energy currency.
That's it. Our sources talked about the sodium-potassium pump as a classic example.
Oh yeah, that one. What makes it so important?
Well, the sodium-potassium pump is constantly moving sodium ions out of the cell and potassium ions in, and this creates what we call an electrochemical gradient across the cell membrane. It's crucial for a lot of things, like nerve impulses and muscle contractions.
So it's like maintaining a voltage, kind of like a battery, that powers those activities.
Exactly. It's a really cool example of how cells can use energy to create and maintain those gradients.
It really highlights how everything is connected within the cell, how one process depends on another.
Absolutely. And if that balance gets disrupted, it can cause some serious problems for the cell. It can even lead to cell death.
It's incredible how much is going on inside these tiny little worlds. We've talked about organelles, transport systems, energy production, and this delicate balance that keeps everything running smoothly. But I'm curious, what happens when things go wrong? When that balance gets messed up?
That's where we start to see the connection between what's happening at the cellular level and disease.
We've talked about this balancing act inside cells, homeostasis, and it's clearly like super important for life. But what happens when it gets messed up? What are the consequences for the cell itself, but also for the whole organism?
That's when we see the link between, those problems at the cellular level and disease. Lots of diseases, actually. Diabetes, cancer, even neurodegenerative disorders. They can often be traced back to disruptions in cellular homeostasis.
So it's like a city, right? When the infrastructure fails, things start to fall apart. The power goes out, transportation breaks down, communication stops working.
Perfect analogy. Take diabetes, for example. In diabetes, cells become resistant to insulin.
Insulin, right.
And insulin, well, it helps regulate blood sugar levels.
Right.
So when cells resist insulin, it throws off that balance of glucose uptake. And that leads to a whole cascade of problems.
Our sources also mention cancer as a prime example of when things go really wrong at the cellular level.
Yeah, cancer is basically a disease of uncontrolled cell growth. Normally, cells divide and grow in a very regulated way. But with cancer, that regulation breaks down. The cells just start multiplying like crazy.
We go rogue.
They do. They form tumors and invade other tissue. It's like they've ignored all the rules and are just doing their own thing.
And those disruptions, they can happen at a really tiny level, right? Like with DNA replication or protein synthesis.
Exactly. Even small glitches in those processes can have huge consequences. It's like a domino effect. One thing goes wrong, and it can trigger a whole chain reaction.
Makes you realize how important it is to understand all these fundamental processes. How cells maintain that balance, how they communicate, how they control their growth. It's like knowing how a car engine works.
I like that. The more we learn about these basic mechanisms, the better we'll be at developing new treatments for diseases. It's like having a roadmap of the cell, We can see where things have gone wrong and figure out how to fix them.
This deep dive has really been an eye-opener, I mean, it's just amazing to think that these tiny little units of life are so complex and that understanding them is key to understanding so much about health and disease.
I'm glad to hear that. But remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg, really. There's still so much we don't know about cells. And each new discovery brings us closer to understanding the mysteries of life itself.
I'm definitely feeling inspired to learn more. Thanks for taking us on this incredible journey, into the building blocks of life.
It's been my pleasure. Never stop exploring the fascinating world of cells. There's always something new to discover.
And that's a wrap for this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed learning about the amazing world of cells. Until next time. Keep those neurons firing and those cells thriving.